Welcome back. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I got another crazy idea for you. If you've been paying attention to what's been happening in the latest patch, you'll know Japan has been being left out. This and some Reddit posts have inspired me to create a Japanese expansion list. Vehicles I think that should be added to the Japanese tree. I have a large amount of vehicles for every section of this tree, starting off with the main line, the medium tanks. Starting at rank 1, right after the Chiha, we have the Chi-Ni, a prototype competing design with the Chiha, unfortunately lost out. It has 30 millimeters of armor and the same cannon. After that, we're going to skip all the way down to rank 4 with the STA-2B. The STA-2B is a mysterious tank that I've seen one photo of. I don't know all the details about this. It has the same muzzle brake as the Type 61, so perhaps it's STA-2 with a new cannon. I heard its frontal plate is now flat but has the same amount of armor as the usual mantlet. Right after that is the STA-3. The continuation of the development of the Type 61 eventually came to this, the A3, which was armed with a autoloader and some other minor goodies. Unfortunately, the tank was found to be too expensive, so they went with the competing design, the STA-4. Because this tank would be at 6.7 thanks to the autoloader, I think it would be appropriate if it were to be a premium, though it would be welcome in the main tech tree. At rank 5, I have the broad suggestion of more STBs. There are about 6 STBs. I personally don't know all the details about them, and I haven't been able to find them on the internet, but I know that they exist somewhere out there. For example, I found this interesting picture of an STB-4 with a plow attachment. Generally, I wouldn't suggest almost copy and paste tanks, but the issue right now with Japan at rank 5, 7.7, where the STB is currently sits, there are no other vehicles to take out with it. So you're forced to bring up a lower tier vehicle and be at a disadvantage than the other nations. This would allow a player to take out 2 of the same vehicle without being at the same disadvantage. At rank 6, Japan has the same issue with the Type 74. My proposal? Same solution. There's about 6 different Type 64s, A through G. But unlike the STBs, these varied in minor ways. The 2 I suggest they add, the Type 64A. At 8.0, it would have no APFSDS. The Type 64B is the one we currently have in game, to my understanding, and the Type 64E at 8.7 has the ability to fire heat multi-purpose. The exact details of the heat multi-purpose round I cannot find, but it's another type of round, and I hear it's rather lethal. Preferably those would be foldered together. After the folder of Type 64s, we have another Type 64, but this time it's the Type 64G Kai. At 9.0, it's a Type 64 with added on composite armor. After that, there is the STC, the prototype to the Type 90 at 9.3. And finally, you guessed it, the Type 90. One of Japan's current main battle tanks would be a good adversary to the M1 Abrams. Starting back down at the bottom with the light tank line at rank 2 at 1.3 with the Type 2 Kito. This tank was an improvement of the Type 89 Chi-Ni, carrying the improved Type 1 73mm anti-tank gun, although it had around the same armor. In a folder with that prior tank, the Type 3 Ki-Ri. This tank shared a chassis with the Type 95 Ha-Go, although it had a 57mm cannon. Last in the line of that folder is the Type 4 Ki-Nu, which was a conversion of an existing Type 95 Ha-Go chassis fitted with a Type 97 Chiha turret. Made hastily to increase their number of armored vehicles, it carried the Type 90 57mm cannon. Next up is the Type 3 Ka-Chi. It is essentially a boat tank version of the Chiha Kai. Same turret. The armor I believe is also the same, 50mm. A limited number of these were produced, only 19, but they were produced. This would be a great addition. I would really like it to see Gaijin allow you to keep the floats on so you can have boat tank wars. I'd place it around 2.0. In a folder with that would be the Type 5 Toku, built on the chassis of the Ka-Chi. Held 5 crew members and had one Type 1 47mm cannon in a casemate style, and on the top in a turret a 25mm anti-tank autocannon. I was unfortunately able to find the stats of the 25mm autocannon, but I believe it is a anti-tank weapon, so I'm pretty sure it would have some good stats. I would place this tank around 2.3, though this would be a bit more awkward to use than the prior one. It would still be a nice addition, a very oddball tank, something that would be fun, good memes. The final rank 2 light tank is the Type 5 Keto. This was armed with a 47mm anti-tank gun, had a thickest armor at 20mm, and a top speed of 50 km/h on roads. I guess you could say this is the Japanese equivalent to the M22. Jumping all the way to rank 4, right after the Type 60, we have an attempted improvement of the Type 60, armed with 406mm recoilless rifles, more ammo, and unfortunately less speed because of the added weight. I placed this one at 7.0 because it's a slight improvement, though I wouldn't argue if it were to be at 6.7. The Type 60 ATM, I think we can all agree, is awful. Not entirely on its own merits, there are some glitches that it has, but to improve this downtrodden tank, a possible modular upgrade, be able to carry 4 ATGM launchers on his back for faster fire rates. This would make the tank 100% less bad. I still wouldn't say it's good, but it's something. The next two in a folder together at rank 6, the B78 Prototype IFV, armed with a 25mm autocannon and 1 mouse aim ATGM. I don't know exactly what kind, but I can assume it is the Type 79 JU MAT with a speed of 200 meters per second and estimated penetration at 700mm. This would make a deadly addition to Japan's 7.7 lineup. But as I said, in a folder with that would be the 105mm GSR. Built on the B78's chassis, it was a mysterious recoilless rifle tank destroyer. Unfortunately, I do not know the penetration stats on this, so it halts me from giving it a proper battle rating, but I want to say somewhere around 7.3. At the end of the tree at 8.0 would be the Type 89 IFV, armed with 2 Type 79 JU MAT ATGM launchers and 1 35mm Oerlikon KED cannon. This is the same cannon on the Gepard / Type 87, so you can assume it has the same types of ammunition. Generally, this tank would function similar to the German Beaglepanzer. For the tank destroyer lines, down at 1.0 is the Type 5 Ho-Ru, a tank visually similar to the Hetzer, armed with a Type 1 47mm cannon. This would be a rather speedy yet deadly addition, although it has very little armor. At the thickest, it is 12mm. Right after the Ho-Ro is the Ho-To, similar design but armed with a 120mm cannon. This cannon was able to fire both APHE and shrapnel. Couldn't find exact penetration rates, but apparently the APHE weighed 44 pounds and the shrapnel contained 300 lead balls. Folded together with the Ho-Ni is the Ho-Ni 2. Relatively the same tank, except for one difference: it has the Type 91 105mm howitzer. Japan seemed to really like their derp guns. The gun could fire a 15kg high explosive shell, could also fire a chemical, armor piercing, and a shrapnel shell. The muzzle velocity of this cannon was about 546, which is pretty alright for these low tier Japanese guns. Another tank that I think could possibly be a premium is the Type 56 105 experimental self-propelled gun. At 2.0, this is a modified chassis fitted with a M2A1 105mm howitzer. It was Japan's first tank developed after the war. It was unfortunately found to be a failure, and Japan went with an American design to fit the role of self-propelled gun. At this rank, Japan seems to be rather full of 2.0 tank destroyers, so I think having this one be a premium would be alright. A tank I've been having a really hard time putting exactly on where the tree should go. There's actually two. Same design. They were modified Type 95s. One was turned into an open-top tank destroyer carrying a 120mm French World War I cannon. I couldn't find any penetration rates on this cannon, but 120 is rather big. Depending on the penetration rates, this tank could be all the way up to rank 3, maybe 4.0. But it being a First World War cannon, actually being a pre-19 1900s cannon, I'm going to place it rather low just to be safe. The other variant of this, these two would be in the same folder. It carried an 105mm cannon, I believe of Japanese design, and it had a closed top. This one I also don't know too much about the penetrations rate on, and it could definitely expand on where in the tree it would end up. But just to be safe, I'm going to place it low. Both these tanks coming from the Type 95 chassis have very little armor, about 35 at its thickest, and the sides being 12. After that, at 3.0, we have the naval long 120mm Shisei Experimental. This was a 120mm naval cannon attached to a Shisei chassis backwards for some reason. I unfortunately can't find any data on the armor piercing rounds for this cannon, but knowing that it's completely exposed and the cannon fits backwards, I can't functionally see myself putting this higher than the Archer. Jumping to rank 4 is the Type 5 Kato, which is essentially an improvement of the NATO, all realms except for armor, fitting the same cannon as the Ho-Ri. This is like a Japanese Nashorn, and therefore I put it at 4.3. Just like Nashorn, it has very little armor and is open top, in other words exposed to aircraft. Historically, this tank, the parts to it were built, but it was never fully put together before the end of the war. Jumping all the way to rank 6 is the Type 16 Maneuverable Combat Vehicle. This highly advanced modern weapon of war arms the same gun as the Type 47, the 105 L7 cannon, but can reach much higher speeds, although it has no armor, at least to my knowledge. This vehicle is kind of advanced. It was planned to start production in 2015, although mechanically speaking, it doesn't exactly, to my knowledge, have any technology that's not already in War Thunder. According to Wikipedia, armor-wise, it can resist heat shells, but to kinetic ammunition, biggest it can shrug off from the front is 20 and 30mm autocannons, but from the side, it's affected by 50 calibers. For the anti-air line, starting at rank 1 at 1.3 right after the Type 94 is the Kito. This is essentially a Tasi, but with less armor. I'd consider it functionally better than the Type 94 truck because it can shoot in front of itself, though it's not enough better because it still doesn't offer protection at all. Right after that, at 2.0, is the Shisei anti-aircraft truck armed with the Type 88 75mm anti-aircraft cannon. This would function a lot like the K-29 Russian tree, with the introduction of flak rounds whenever that's going to be. I could see this thing becoming a whole lot more effective, otherwise it's going to be an oddly placed tank destroyer. It also came in 105mm flavor, which could be very useful further down the line where the K-29 is in the Russian tree. And just like the K-29, this truck is very slow with a top speed of 16 miles per hour, thanks to all the additional weight. Right after that is the good old M16. Generally speaking, Japan needs more self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, and I couldn't think of one that would fit better at 2.3 than the M16. They did use it after the war for a small amount of time. Not much to talk about. It's already in the game. You know what it looks like. After that, we're jumping all the way to rank 4 with the Sub 1, a prototype SPAAG built on the Type 73 APC, armed with the same gun as the KPZ-70, not the 152, the 20mm Rheinmetall RH-202. This crazy gun had a fire rate of 1,030 rounds per minute and a muzzle velocity of 1,044 meters per second. This gun is already in game on the tank I just said. Penetration range shouldn't be too foreign to you. I'd place this at 4.3. Right after that is the Type 60 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. This was a Type 60 with a M19 turret placed on it back when Japan was remilitarizing and they're trying to find a useful self-propelled anti-air gun. Generally, this design was marginally worse than the M19, which they also did use, but I'd have this one over that. This could be around 4.7, maybe 5.0. Maybe we could have the M19 as well. This could be 4.7, that could be 5.0. Right after the Duster is one of my favorites at 7.0, the Type 61 Sky Sweeper. This is a prototype self-propelled anti-aircraft gun of the M51 Sky Sweeper cannon placed upon the Type 61 chassis. Unfortunately, this prototype was unaccepted, but I think it would be amazing. The Sky Sweeper had 2 5-round magazines placed on it. Unfortunately, it could only fire HE rounds, but it had proximity fuses on those 75mm HE rounds. And if you've played the Naval Closed Beta, you know exactly how deadly those proximity fuses can get. Right after that, 7.7 is the Type 61 SPAAG. This is Type 61 with the same turret as the Type 87. I placed it slightly lower because of the less maneuverability thanks to the older chassis. A final addition to this anti-aircraft tree is the Taha. Issue though is that there's not a lot of information out there on this tank. And if there is, I can't seem to find it. It seemed to have either 1, 2, or 3 37mm autocannons that had either a lot of penetration or not that much penetration. I can say that these autocannons were a copy of a German Pak 18 autocannon, but besides that, I can't really sell you much besides maybe a photo of the chassis blueprint. If some of the proposed penetration rates and fire rates are to believe, this would basically be a Japanese Kugelblitz. There being 3 possible armaments of this does make me hope that perhaps we could have multiple throughout the tree, but regardless, I'm gonna have to put it on the maybe side. A Japanese tank tree would be included with the OI, but we can't just have the OI alone somewhere either in the premium line or maybe the medium tank line. It's a heavy tank, it has to be in a heavy tank line. Luckily, there is quite a few obscure heavy tanks out there that Japan decided to build. Starting off at 1.0 is the Chi-1, Japan's first indigenously designed tank, mounting a 57mm Type 90 cannon and having 6 to 17mm of armor. This thing would not exactly be impressive, though I think it would be fun to add. Being the first indigenously designed tank from Japan, perhaps maybe as a event vehicle. Right after that at 1.3 is a much better tank, the Type 91 heavy tank. This had 12 to 35mm of armor and was armed with a 70mm cannon. Couldn't find exactly what kind of 70mm cannon. There is already a 70mm cannon for Japan on the Rogue Go, but it's terrible, and that's because it doesn't have its heat round that could penetrate, I think it was around from 80 to 100mm of armor. If Gaijin were to add those, this and the Rogo would actually be usable. Right after that, we have some mystery tanks, essentially. Japan developed a slew of heavy tanks, though for some odd reason they were forgotten. These tanks are the Type 96 Ju-1, the Type 97 Ju-Ro, Type 96 Ju-1 Kai, the Type 97 Ju-Ro Kai, the Mitsu 104 Ju-Ha, the Aishi 108 Ju-Ni. There are no photos of these tanks, except for the Mitsu 104, a drawing for an American identification sheet. Apparently they have alright armor with good armaments, and I'm assuming they have strange multi-turreted designs. Hopefully in the future information will be available for those, and I'll probably make a video on it. After all of those, we have another iffy tank. I titled it the Me Too. Essentially what it is during the OI's production, there was a moment in time where it couldn't be developed any further for a halt in materials being sent to them. At this stage, it was missing its main turret and its 75mm add-on armor, leaving it only 75mm at the thickest. While this was not ever intended to be the final design, I think it would be alright to add it to War Thunder as some sort of prototype, much in the same way of the STAs and B. It still had its 2 frontal 47mm cannons. I've decided to place at around 3.7. I find this is right before the 47s become completely obsolete. Any lower, its armor would be rather vast and probably be a killing machine. It could also be a good premium. Its odd design and heavy armor would obviously attract a lot of customers. At rank 3 is the well-known OI, armed with 150mm howitzer and 2 47mm cannons with a max armor of 150mm. Its frontal armor is well sloped. It does have a single weak point where the armor is flat, though it's still 150mm. This thing is rather hard to balance. I think it might end up around 5.7. While the armor will be rather thick, the main cannon cannon will be rather weak. Placing it higher, you could try to derp gun your way to victory, but the main armor-piercing round would be rather ineffective. The armor wouldn't be too overpowered because, as I said, there's that one weak point, and if you try to angle your tank to avert that weak point, it exposes another weak point in between the side armor and the added on side armor of an additional 35 millimeters. Total side armor is 70 millimeters. There is a large gap for the tracks, and you can shoot in there and only have to go through the 75 millimeters, making it so if you try to angle this thing, you may end up exposing yourself even further. The final heavy tank at 6.7 is the Shisei. This tank is also rather a mystery. It was meant to be a medium tank, although it is essentially a well-upped armored Chi-Ri, armed with the same cannon as the Ho-Ri, which has similar performance to the Long 88. Its frontal armor, its frontal upper plate armor, at a very sharp angle, is 120 millimeters. The only real weak point frontally of this tank is the turret, which is about 180 millimeters of armor. Essentially, this thing is a Japanese Tiger II. That would be the end of the heavy line, unfortunately. Japan never put much further thought into heavy tanks, and especially not after the war. I had an idea that perhaps at rank 6, instead of clogging up the medium tank line, we could have the STC and the Type 90 trail off the heavy tank line. Of course, there would be a whole tier, rank 5, completely empty. That's just an idea. As a final part, there's a hefty list of premiums that could be added. At rank 1, at 1.3, the FT-17 Co, a Japanese alteration to the French tank, giving it a 57 millimeter cannon. I believe they added some armor. At rank 2, the Chiha GS. This was a Chiha altered to have a grenade launcher. The grenades it could fire would be the Type 3 anti-tank grenade that could penetrate 70 millimeters of armor. It could also fire other types of grenades, but I do not know. And on the back, it had a bunch of extra rockets. I couldn't find the stats exactly on these rockets, but I think they're only high explosive, but they are 200 millimeters. That's a lot of explosive. At 2.0, they would be rather deadly. Perhaps because of this point, it should be a bit higher. Another rank 2 at 2.0 with the Ho-I, but with a experimental high velocity 57 millimeter cannon. I don't know the details of this cannon, but it was built in limited numbers. This would make a good event vehicle, being unnecessary in the tree and rather unique. After that is the Shisei 150 millimeter Tarenzo. This is a rocket truck that I thought would fit perfectly well at 2.3, maybe a bit up tier because, you know, rockets totally OP. This would be here simply for the fact that apparently every tree needs a rocket tank, and this would be Japan's. At 3.0 would be the Japanese Panzer III J1. They bought a few from the Germans and had them sent over. I don't think they did anything with them, but they were there. It would make a great premium. At 4.3, the Chi-Ri 1. It's the Chi-Ri, except for a smaller turret and no autoloader. This would be more or less pointless in the main tree, and as a premium, I don't see why anyone would buy it. It does the same thing as the Chi-To, so I think it would be a good event vehicle. The Chi-Ri does have a better engine than Chi-To. Unfortunately, it's slightly bigger, and unlike the Chi-To Late, it does not have that nice angled armor. But if it was an event vehicle, people wanting to grind through the Japanese tree without buying a premium would definitely partake in that event. At rank 3, at 5.3, is heavy tank number 5. In other words, the Japanese Panther. Japan apparently bought the blueprints to build a Panther and made one of their own, although there were some slight differences, like the gun mantlet not having a nice curve but being flat. The gun, a Japanese copy of the PAC-41 AT gun, dubbed the Type G, when is able to penetrate 210 millimeters at 100 meters with a muzzle velocity of 1,260 meters per second. If you're wondering why this gun wasn't used on any other Japanese tanks, it's because Japan was running low on tungsten. That's for the type of ammo this thing used. For a time, the gun was also put on a Type 5 NATO and presumed Chi-To prototype, which could also be interesting premiums. And the turret was moved forward slightly because they had to use a bigger engine. Other than that, the armor was relatively the same. This would go great with the Japanese Tiger. You could basically play Japan without actually playing Japan. So that's my Japanese tank tech tree expansion proposal. This has been a long time in the making. I've been researching random Japanese tanks for a while. I got a big influence from a dude who posted stuff on Reddit and my Wolfentrager, who researches Japanese tanks. If you have any comments, concerns, or questions, hit me up in the comments or wherever I post this. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more, subscribe and like this video. video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.